Please welcome Casey Hammer to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. In that clip, Casey, you say, "I refuse to be silenced." It was about 7 years ago that you wrote a book about your childhood, about your family. But it seems because of Armie Hammer and these allegations that there's real interest. Did you feel like, finally, people are listening? I had a book for 7 years and no one really, it seemed, paid attention.
I think, Tamron, the reason I wrote the book in the first place was as a healing, journaling for me. I was trying to make sense of what I had dealt with my whole childhood and my family. And, you know, you find out that your mother's aware of all the abuse that's happening under her roof and didn't stop it or protect me. It was horrifying, but that's all I knew. It was how I grew up. It wasn't like we had social media back then, so it's kind of like I couldn't go to the neighbors and say, is this the way rich people act? Like, there was no frame of reference.
For frame of reference on your family's background, so your grandfather, Armie, multimillionaire, Julian is your father, Michael is your brother, and Armie is your nephew. The legacy money in this family, for perspective, your grandfather was a tycoon, roughly $200 million, Forbes magazine. So you were, from birth, in this social circle. In the documentary, you see your grandfather with Princess Diana and a series of celebrities. So on the outside, this looks like a glamorous family.
Right. It was perfect on the outside, and we were always camera ready, and my grandfather controlled the narrative. So at an early age, we were taught to go outside the front doors and be a certain way, don't embarrass the family, and women were disposable in this family.
When you say disposable, what do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, my father was an only child, so it wasn't a large family at all, and then you had my brother and myself, and my mom left my father when I was about 11 and was destroyed in court by my grandfather. So again, my grandfather did not respect women, and I was told all along, as long as I look pretty, make sure I don't embarrass anybody, I would be taking care of the rest of my life. So no one took women seriously at all.
You talk about in the documentary being a kid, I think you were around 11 years old, you walk in to, and this is an adult show, you walk in, you allege that it was a full-on orgy with drugs and women all over the house, and you're a kid and you discover these pornographic photos.
Right.
And this happened over and over in your childhood, just being exposed to these horrifying things.
Correct, and I think the tragic thing that's brought out in House of Hammer is the fact that I'm 11 years old and my father has me hold a phone book while he shoots at it. So, you know, but again, that's my normal, that's what I was used to. So it's something that's horrific to a lot of people, but that's all I knew, so that's a learned behavior.
Was there anyone protecting you? I know that you talk about your mother in the documentary, but around you, were there any adults who said, wait a minute, this is a kid and this kid should not be exposed to this?
No, I mean, we are the true definition of dysfunctional, and it's, again, threats of bodily harm or retribution or disownment. I mean, there was always this, if you embarrass or do anything outside the family, and we were always photographed and surveilled, you know, the cameras by our own family. It was like they were watching every move we made.
So when the allegations against Armie Hammer were made public, did you say, of course, this is this family? How did you process it?
I wasn't surprised, and the reason I say that is because what I experienced growing up was so familiar, and it's not something, Tamron, that you just wake up one day and decide to become a monster. It's a learned behavior, and that's what this documentary shows. Is it's a multi-generational abuse, a cycle of horrific.
Do you think it's because they were wealthy? Do you believe your grandfather and the other men in your family believed that women were disposable, that they could act in violent and reckless ways because they were rich enough to get away with it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a matter of privilege. It's a matter of being above the law. And those people, they believe that they can't get caught. And when they do get caught, they buy their way out of it. And that's something you learn. You don't just see what's in the current with Armie. It goes into the family, and it shows how this all manifested into each generation of abuse. And again, it's horrific. And it's something that I had no one to talk to, and so that's why I want to be an advocate for survivors and victims, because they need a voice, and hopefully, thank you, but they need to know they're not alone, because we all know that abusers want to isolate people and keep them alone, and that's why people don't come forward. It's because they're afraid.
I should make the point that Armie Hammer, your nephew, has denied the allegations against him. He says that these were consensual relationships and that the abuse allegations from a number of women in his past, he denies these things. When we come back, I'm curious, his career has been put on hold. He was supposed to make a movie with Jennifer Lopez and others. That is not happening. There are reports that he's now selling timeshares in the Caribbean. When we come back, I want to know what you think should happen to him after the break.
It's one of those things where it just continues, and until someone breaks the cycle. And it's so important for someone like you, who's very intelligent, very successful, to let people know it can happen to anybody.
It's so common.
Welcome back. That was a conversation between Casey and one of the alleged victims, Courtney Busekovich, discussing breaking the cycle of abuse against women. They say abuse at the hands of men in the Hammer family. It is part of a new Discovery Plus docuseries, House of Hammer. Casey Hammer reveals secrets she say exist in her family as part of the dynasty of this very rich and famous family. With your nephew, Armie Hammer, there are audio clips of him, yes. There are text messages, there are comments where he admits to wanting to be a cannibal and devouring women. It's all shocking. Yeah. He says that these things are not true. He maintains that all of these interactions have been completely consensual and agreed upon in advance. There's video in the documentary where he walks through a hotel room, this lavish hotel room. He's giving a tour, and there's a woman on the bed like an animal, right, not moving, and he ignores her.
Right.
When you saw that clip, again, you talk about deal with the devil and the family history. Right. When you saw that clip of that woman in his room.
I mean, it's all shocking, but again, based on what I experienced growing up, it didn't surprise me, because Tamron, you've got to realize that these men need to be held accountable, and I think that's the reason, one of the reasons for the focus in the docuseries is it's got to stop.
Well, I mean, your grandfather's long gone, you know, your other family members are still alive. What do you believe in the case of Armie Hammer? What should happen? Because he's not been charged with anything. I don't even know what he could be charged with, quite honestly. But what do you think should happen?
I mean, I'm not one. I believe in the justice system. It's my point is that consent is a huge topic that needs to be discussed and defined, because it's such a gray area, yeah. Right? And in my world, if you're doing something, I'm not here to judge any of your behaviors, but if it gets to a point where you're uncomfortable or it doesn't feel right and you say stop, that person needs to stop. And if they don't, yeah. It crosses a line, yeah. And it's criminal. I mean, again, it needs to be a conversation. Yeah. Accountability needs to be a conversation. And the fact that someone needs to speak for these victims, and again, by sharing my story, yeah. And my truth, because when I first came out with my book, I detail it a lot in those pages, but when...
Well, you were believed. Your book came out many years ago, and people didn't believe this. And then when the allegations against your nephew were revealed, mm-hmm. You saw a groundswell of support. The show is about not being broken by betrayal. Looking and reading your book and the documentary of these allegations, I don't know how you weren't broken, because a child should never see and experience the things that you detail right. In that doc. So how are you still standing? How are you still able to take on your rich family?
You know, I believe that when I saw the end result, because the producers for House of Hammer originally reached out to me and had read my book and wanted to tell that story, because I didn't want to be a soundbite for my nephew's implosion, right? He was going to do that on his own. If people were going to talk to me, I wanted them to hear why I wanted to be a spokesperson for yeah. Victims and survivors, right? So that was my path.
Would you be willing to sit down with him and tell him if he doesn't believe what he did was wrong? Are you willing to one day sit down with him to get him to see what you say is the truth of the family?
You know what? To me, and I don't mean to be callous, but it's almost a waste of energy. Let's turn the focus on the survivors and the path of women that he left behind, because they're the ones that need help.
Yeah.
I mean, the focus lately has been on, oh, poor Armie, what about his career? What about this?
Oh,
What
I
about...
don't think anybody is saying that.
Well, again, the cannibalism.
I think,
right?
Well, let me be clear. I've not heard anyone say poor him. I do think people wonder.
Misspoke that
what,
word.
That's okay. That's okay. This is a show. We talk about everything, and I get things. But I think what I'm asking is that people do wonder. Your childhood impacts you in many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
And that doesn't allow for an excuse.
No.
But these allegations and these things, and given that you say this is generational, this just keeps going and going, is there not a healing, but is there a conversation to be had with him?
In general, there's always a conversation, right? It's whether that person is willing to listen or not. My family, the men generationally, won't listen to anybody. They're above it all. And I think that that's what the purpose of this docuseries. It's like, for instance, I say to people, the reason you go to watch it, you may be entertainment or, Army, but by the time you're finished watching all 3 episodes, I guarantee you, your opinion's going to change. You're going to want to shout from the rooftops and make a difference.
Can I tell you, though, I was hesitant to ask you this next question, but I'm now...
That's okay.
He has children.
Yes.
Are you worried about the children?
Absolutely. I mean, no child, based on what I went through and lived through, and some people will corroborate that in the docuseries, it's horrific. But again, that's all I knew. So he needs to be held accountable, and I think all this attention and the beauty of House of Hammer, it's going to shine a light. It stops now. It stops now.
Again, I should point out again that we reached out to Armie Hammer's team to get his thoughts on the docuseries. We did not receive a response. In 2021, he put out a statement through his attorney saying, Mr. Hammer has maintained that all of his interactions have been completely consensual, discussed and agreed upon in advance, and mutually participatory. Casey, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
And you can watch all 3 parts of House of Hammer streaming now on Discovery Plus.